Sourdough. This ancient bread predates commercial yeast by thousands of years, relying on wild yeast and bacteria captured from the air to ferment dough over 12 to 24 hours. The starter, a mixture of flour and water left to ferment, contains hundreds of different microorganisms that vary by location, which is why San Francisco sourdough tastes different from French sourdough despite using identical recipes. The oldest continuously maintained sourdough starter dates back to 1847, kept alive by feeding it fresh flour and water daily for over 175 years without ever letting it die. True sourdough requires no commercial yeast whatsoever, though many bakeries cheat by adding small amounts of yeast to speed up rising time and ensure consistent results. The tangy flavor comes from lactic acid bacteria producing acids during fermentation. Longer fermentation creates more acidity and stronger sour taste. Alaskan gold rush miners in the 1890s carried sourdough starter in pouches around their necks to keep it warm with body heat, earning the nickname sourdoughs that still describes Alaskan old-timers today. A properly fermented sourdough loaf can last up to 7 days at room temperature without molding because the acidity inhibits mold growth, while yeast bread molds within 3 days. The signature holes in sourdough crumb come from gas bubbles produced during fermentation. Larger, irregular holes indicate proper fermentation, while uniform small holes suggest under-fermented or commercial yeast bread. Baguette. French law passed in 1993 strictly defines what can be called a traditional baguette. Only flour, water, salt, and yeast permitted with no fat, no preservatives, and no additives of any kind. Each traditional baguette must weigh exactly 250 grams and measure 65 to 70 centimeters long with a diameter of 5 to 6 centimeters. Bakers use special scales and measuring sticks to ensure compliance. The bread's distinctive slashes aren't decorative but functional, allowing steam to escape during baking and creating the characteristic crispy crust. Parisians consume over 6 million baguettes daily, buying them fresh twice daily because the bread goes stale within 6 hours of baking. French people consider day-old baguettes inedible. The baguette's origins are disputed. Some claim it was invented in 1830 when Austrian bakers brought Vienna bread to Paris, while others say it emerged in the early 1900s when French law prohibited bakers from working before 4 a.m., forcing them to create a fast-rising bread. A perfectly baked baguette makes a hollow sound when tapped on the bottom and has a crust so thin and crispy it shatters when squeezed, releasing a distinctive crackling sound the French call singing. The interior crumb should be creamy white with irregular holes and a slightly chewy texture. Industrial baguettes sold in supermarkets use rapid rise yeast and dough conditioners, completing production in 2 hours versus 8 hours for traditional baguettes, creating inferior flavor and texture. Ciabatta. Despite seeming ancient, ciabatta was invented in 1982 by Italian baker Arnaldo Cavallari in response to French baguettes dominating the sandwich market. The name means slipper in Italian, describing the bread's flat, elongated shape. Ciabatta dough contains extremely high water content, often 75% to 80% hydration, making it so wet and sticky that it can barely be handled. But this creates the characteristic large, irregular holes throughout the crumb. The dough is never kneaded in the traditional sense, but rather folded and stretched gently to develop gluten without deflating the delicate structure. Authentic ciabatta uses a pre-ferment called biga that ferments 12 to 16 hours before mixing the final dough, developing complex flavors impossible in direct method breads. The crust should be thin and crispy, but not thick or chewy like baguette. The Italian ideal emphasizes delicate crust contrasting with soft, hole-riddled interior. American ciabatta is usually made with lower hydration dough that's easier to handle but creates denser bread with smaller holes. Some bakeries create ciabatta buns by shaping the dough into rounds, though purists argue these aren't real ciabatta since shape affects texture and crust development. The bread dries out quickly and becomes unpleasantly hard within 24 hours, which is why Italians buy it fresh daily. Rye bread. Dense, dark rye bread has been a staple across northern and eastern Europe for over 1,000 years because rye grows in cold, poor soil where wheat fails completely. Pure rye dough contains no gluten-forming proteins like wheat does, so it never rises tall and fluffy. Instead, it creates dense, heavy loaves with tight crumb. Most rye breads mix wheat flour with rye to add gluten and improve rise, with percentages varying from 30% rye to 100% rye depending on regional traditions. German Pumpernickel uses 100% coarsely ground rye flour and bakes at very low temperature for 16 to 24 hours, caramelizing the bread's natural sugars and creating its distinctive dark color and slightly sweet flavor. The dark color in many commercial rye breads comes from added caramel coloring or molasses rather than long baking, creating fake pumpernickel that tastes nothing like the real thing. Scandinavian rye breads are often sour because they use natural sourdough fermentation. The acidity helps break down rye's complex carbohydrates and makes it more digestible. Jewish deli rye bread contains caraway seeds that give it distinctive flavor, though traditional Eastern European rye rarely used caraway. Jewish bakers added it in America to differentiate their bread. Rye bread stays fresh longer than wheat bread because rye's pentosans retain moisture better, keeping the bread soft for 5 to 7 days versus 2 to 3 days for wheat bread. Focaccia. This flatbread from Italy dates back to ancient Rome, where similar breads were baked on the hearth's hot stones. The name comes from Latin focus, meaning hearth or fireplace. Traditional Genovese focaccia is dimpled with fingertips before baking, creating pools where olive oil collects. And it contains so much olive oil that the dough is almost fried as it bakes from the bottom up. The bread should be at least 2 centimeters thick with an airy, open crumb and crispy bottom crust from oil contact. Thin, dense focaccia indicates poor technique or insufficient fermentation. Regional variations include focaccia di Recco, which has no yeast and consists of 2 paper-thin sheets of dough with soft cheese pressed between them, baking into crispy layers. Focaccia Barese from Puglia is topped with tomatoes and olives before baking, creating a primitive pizza ancestor. The dough contains higher water content than typical bread, 60% to 70%, creating extensibility needed for stretching it flat without tearing. Some bakers ferment focaccia dough in refrigerators for 24 to 48 hours, developing complex flavors similar to sourdough without maintaining a starter. American focaccia is often flavored with rosemary, sun-dried tomatoes, or garlic, while Italian versions emphasize olive oil quality over toppings. The bread dries out within 1 day and is traditionally eaten warm from the oven, or used for sandwiches within hours of baking. Challah. This traditional Jewish braided bread is enriched with eggs and oil, creating golden color and soft, tender crumb, unlike crusty European breads. The braiding traditionally uses 6 strands representing the 12 tribes of Israel. 2 6-strand braids side by side symbolize the double portion of manna that fell on Fridays before Sabbath. The dough must contain no dairy because Jewish dietary laws prohibit mixing meat and dairy, and challah accompanies meat meals. Each loaf is brushed with egg wash before baking, creating glossy mahogany crust that looks almost lacquered. The bread contains significant amounts of sugar, usually 10% to 15% by flour weight, making it slightly sweet and causing it to brown quickly during baking. Traditional challah uses only white flour, eggs, oil, sugar, yeast, and salt, though modern variations add raisins, chocolate chips, or everything bagel seasoning. The texture should be pillowy soft and slightly elastic, tearing apart easily by hand without needing a knife. Challah goes stale within 2 days but makes exceptional French toast because the egg-rich bread absorbs custard beautifully without falling apart. Some Jewish communities make round challah for Rosh Hashanah, symbolizing the cyclical nature of the year, while others make hand-shaped challahs in the form of ladders or birds with symbolic meanings. Naan. This leavened flatbread originated in India and neighboring regions over 2,500 years ago, traditionally cooked by slapping wet dough directly onto the walls of a tandoor oven, where temperatures exceed 480 degrees Celsius. The extreme heat causes the bread to puff up immediately while creating characteristic charred spots on the surface and a chewy, tender interior. Authentic Naan uses yogurt in the dough, creating tangy flavor and tender texture through the yogurt's acidity and enzymatic action. The bread is meant to be eaten immediately while hot and flexible. Within 10 minutes, it stiffens and loses its soft character. Traditional naan uses no oil, but modern versions often brush the surface with butter or ghee immediately after cooking, creating rich flavor and preventing the bread from drying out. The teardrop shape comes from gravity pulling the dough downward while it cooks on the vertical tandoor walls. Western restaurants often make naan in regular ovens on pizza stones, creating acceptable but inferior results, lacking the charred spots and dramatic puff from tandoor cooking. Garlic naan, now ubiquitous, didn't exist traditionally. It's a modern innovation appealing to Western tastes. The dough typically ferments 2 to 4 hours at room temperature, developing flavor while remaining easy to work with. Some regional variations use milk instead of yogurt, or add fennel seeds, raisins, or ground pistachios for sweetness. Pita. This Middle Eastern flatbread forms a pocket during baking through a phenomenon where steam generates inside the dough, separating it into 2 layers. The pocket formation requires specific conditions. very hot oven temperature of 260 degrees Celsius or higher, properly developed gluten, and correct hydration of around 60%. When conditions are perfect, the bread balloons dramatically within 60 seconds, creating a hollow interior. Pita that doesn't pocket, called sad pita, results from insufficient oven temperature, overworked dough, or dough rolled too thin or thick. The bread is meant to be eaten fresh within hours of baking. Stale pita becomes brittle, and the layers separate completely, though it can be revived by steaming briefly. Traditional pita uses whole wheat flour or a mixture of whole wheat and white flour, creating heartier flavor than all white versions. The bread contains minimal fat, just a tablespoon of oil per batch, making it healthier than many breads. Commercial pita often includes dough conditioners and preservatives extending shelf life to weeks, but the texture becomes rubbery and chewy rather than tender. Greek pita is thicker and doesn't form a pocket, used as a wrap for gyros rather than a pocket bread. This creates confusion about what real pita should be. Pretzel. The twisted knot shape of pretzels originated in medieval European monasteries around 610 AD, with the three holes supposedly representing the Holy Trinity and the crossed arms representing prayer position. Traditional pretzels are boiled briefly in lye solution before baking, creating the distinctive dark brown crust and unique tangy flavor that separates them from regular bread. The lye, sodium hydroxide, is caustic enough to cause chemical burns if mishandled, which is why home bakers substitute baking soda, though this creates inferior crust and flavor. German regulations dictate exact pretzel proportions. The arms must be precisely 1.5 times thicker than the body, and the pretzel must weigh between 40 and 80 grams. The large crystal salt sprinkled on top is pretzel salt, a special coarse salt that doesn't dissolve during baking like table salt would. Bavarian pretzels are served fresh and soft with butter, while American soft pretzels are often eaten plain with mustard. Hard pretzels were invented accidentally in the 1860s, when a Pennsylvania baker fell asleep and overbaked his pretzels. Rather than discarding them, he discovered the crunchy version had commercial appeal. The golden brown color comes from the Maillard reaction accelerated by lie's alkalinity. Without lye, pretzels would stay pale like bagels. Traditional pretzel dough contains no sugar, eggs, or fat, just flour, water, salt, and yeast, making them remarkably low-calorie compared to other baked goods. Brioche. This French bread contains so much butter and eggs that it's almost cake, with traditional recipes using equal weights of butter to flour, a ratio that creates incredibly rich, tender crumb. The dough is notoriously difficult to work with because the high-fat content prevents gluten development, requiring long mixing times and specific techniques to achieve proper texture. Classic brioche dough ferments overnight in refrigeration, allowing the butter to firm up while fermentation develops flavor. Working warm brioche dough is nearly impossible because the butter melts and the dough becomes soup. The bread comes in several shapes: brioche à tête with a distinctive top knot, brioche Nanterre baked in a loaf pan, or brioche de Nanterre with smaller balls placed side by side that tear apart easily. The golden yellow color comes from egg yolks. A proper brioche uses at least 6 egg yolks per pound of flour, sometimes more. The texture should be pillowy soft with a fine, tender crumb that tears apart in feathery shreds rather than clean slices. Brioche goes stale quickly despite its richness, becoming dry and crumbly within 24 hours unless stored airtight. The bread is traditionally served at breakfast in France, either plain or as toast, and used for luxury sandwiches or as the bun for high-end hamburgers. Some recipes add orange blossom water or vanilla for aromatic complexity, though purists argue this isn't traditional. Pumpernickel. Authentic German pumpernickel is made from 100% coarsely ground rye flour and bakes at 120 degrees Celsius for 16 to 24 hours in closed pans, creating dense, dark bread with slightly sweet flavor from caramelized sugars. The name's origins are disputed. Some claim it comes from pumpern, to break wind, and nickel, a goblin, suggesting the bread causes flatulence, while others trace it to the combination of the German verb for farting and a term for Nicholas, essentially meaning devil's fart. Traditional pumpernickel contains no caramel coloring, cocoa powder, or coffee. The dark color develops naturally from the Maillard reaction during the extremely long baking time. The bread is sliced paper thin, sometimes less than 3 millimeters thick. Because its density makes thick slices overwhelmingly heavy, German pumpernickel stays fresh for months when wrapped properly. Its acidity and lack of preservatives mean it doesn't mold, but simply dries out slowly. American pumpernickel is usually wheat bread with rye flour, molasses, and caramel coloring added to create dark color, baked in 1 hour instead of 24, bearing no resemblance to real pumpernickel. The bread has a subtle sweetness despite containing no added sugar. because the long baking caramelizes the rye's natural carbohydrates. Traditional pumpernickel is served with butter, strong cheese, or pickled herring in Germanic countries. Tortilla. Corn tortillas date back over 10,000 years in Mesoamerica, making them one of humanity's oldest breads, still consumed in nearly identical form. Traditional tortillas use masa, corn that's been nixtamalized by cooking an alkaline solution, then ground into dough, a process that increases nutritional value and creates distinctive flavor. The nixtamalization process makes corn's niacin bioavailable and adds calcium from the lime used in cooking, preventing the nutritional deficiency diseases that plagued corn-dependent populations who didn't nixtamalize. Fresh tortillas are cooked on a flat griddle called a comal for about 30 seconds per side at very high heat, creating flexibility and characteristic toasted spots without making them crispy. The tortillas should puff up during cooking. This indicates proper hydration and technique, creating a steam pocket inside. Flour tortillas are a relatively recent invention from northern Mexico, where wheat was more available than corn, and they contain lard or vegetable shortening, making them softer and more pliable than corn tortillas. Authentic corn tortillas contain only masa, water, and sometimes salt. Any other ingredients indicate non-traditional preparation. Store-bought tortillas often contain preservatives extending shelf life to weeks, while fresh tortillas go stale within 1 day and must be kept warm wrapped in cloth. Reheating stale tortillas on a dry comal can revive them briefly, softening the texture and bringing back some flexibility. Bagel. These ring-shaped breads originated in the 17th century Poland, possibly created as a gift for a Polish king who loved horseback riding. The hole supposedly allowed the bread to be easily hung on stirrups. Traditional bagel dough is boiled briefly in water before baking, creating the distinctive chewy crust and dense interior that separates bagels from regular bread. New York bagels are legendarily superior supposedly because of New York City's water chemistry, though blind taste tests show this is largely myth. Technique and recipe matter far more than water. Authentic bagels contain no fat, eggs, or sugar, beyond a tiny amount to feed the yeast, creating simple bread, relying on boiling and technique for flavor and texture. The boiling step gelatinizes the starches on the surface, creating a barrier that prevents the bagel from rising too much and maintaining dense texture. Montreal bagels are boiled in honey-sweetened water and baked in wood-fired ovens, creating sweeter, denser, smaller bagels with larger holes than New York style. The everything bagel, covered in sesame seeds, poppy seeds, garlic, onion, and salt, was invented in the 1980s despite seeming traditional. Mass-produced bagels skip the boiling step and use steam injection ovens instead, creating inferior texture that's more like bread rolls with holes. Croissant. Despite being quintessentially French, croissants were invented in Austria as Kipferl celebrating Vienna's victory over Ottoman invaders in 1683. The crescent shape supposedly mocks the Ottoman flag's crescent moon. French Queen Marie Antoinette brought Viennese bakers to Paris in 1770, introducing the pastry that would eventually become the buttery croissant we know today. Traditional croissant dough is laminated by folding butter into dough repeatedly, creating hundreds of thin, alternating layers of butter and dough that puff up during baking into flaky, airy pastry. Making croissants requires rolling the dough out, folding it in thirds, chilling, then repeating. Typically, 6 folds total create 729 layers. The process takes 2 to 3 days, including resting periods, explaining why authentic croissants cost $4 to $8 each at quality bakeries. The dough must be kept cold during laminating or the butter melts and blends into the dough rather than remaining in distinct layers. This ruins the lamination and creates greasy, doughy pastry instead of flaky layers. Authentic French croissants use only butter for lamination, while cheaper versions use margarine or shortening, creating inferior flavor. The interior should be honeycomb-like with irregular holes and tender texture, while the exterior shatters into buttery flakes when bitten. Croissants go stale within hours of baking and should never be refrigerated, which makes them rock hard. Day-old croissants should be reheated briefly in an oven to restore crispness. Pão de queijo. These Brazilian cheese breads are made from tapioca flour rather than wheat flour, creating naturally gluten-free bread with chewy, bouncy texture unlike any wheat-based bread. The dough contains no yeast and relies entirely on steam for leavening. As moisture heats, it creates steam pockets that cause the breads to puff dramatically. Traditional recipes use hard cheeses like queijo minas, grated finely and mixed into the dough, creating cheese flavor throughout rather than just on the surface. The breads must be eaten warm from the oven when the exterior is crispy and the interior is stretchy and cheese-filled. Within 30 minutes, they deflate and become rubbery. The texture resembles mochi more than bread due to the tapioca starch, creating a chewy, almost elastic quality that some find addictive and others find strange. The bread originated in the 1950s in Minas Gerais state when local cooks experimented with tapioca starch left over from cassava processing. Making the dough requires heating milk, oil, and water to boiling, then pouring it over tapioca flour to gelatinize the starches. Skipping this step creates dough that won't form properly. The breads freeze excellently and can be baked from frozen, making them popular for entertaining, despite the short window of optimal texture after baking. Injera. This spongy Ethiopian flatbread is made from teff flour, an ancient grain so small that 3,000 grains weigh only 1 gram, and fermented for 3 to 5 days before cooking. The fermentation creates thousands of tiny bubbles that remain open on the surface, giving injera its distinctive spongy texture, perfect for soaking up sauces. The bread is cooked on a large flat griddle called a maitad, poured like pancake batter, and cooked on one side only. The top steams through retained heat, creating the characteristic eyes or holes covering the surface. Traditional injera is slightly sour from natural fermentation and has a unique tangy taste that pairs with spicy stews, but tastes strange to those unfamiliar with it. Teff contains complete protein and high levels of iron and calcium, making it more nutritious than wheat or rice. The bread serves as both plate and utensil in Ethiopian dining. Food is served on large injera, and diners tear off pieces to scoop up stews. Injera made from 100% teff is expensive because teff costs $8 to $12 per pound compared to 50 cents per pound for wheat flour, so many Ethiopian restaurants mix teff with cheaper flours. The bread stays soft and pliable at room temperature for 2 to 3 days wrapped in plastic, though it's best eaten fresh.